Hi everyone, welcome to today's lecture. This is a continuation of week 3 lecture, and today I'm just going to go through the sample essay that in the our arguing about literature book, right? So the sample essay is on page 61. So it's page 61 of your arguing about literature, 61 through 63. All right, so I'm going to pretty much go through the whole thing. It's pretty short, so I think that's fine. All right, make sure you have read this this essay before watching this lecture, and make sure you have your book handy with you so that you can kind of follow through. All right, so I'm just going to read the introduction and then talk about what's going on here, right? So the title of the essay is "The Mother's Mixed Messages in Girl," right? So this essay is about the short story by Jamaica Kincaid called "Girl," right? It's in it's a couple of pages before this essay, right? So try to read that too. It's a very short story, right? So first off, right, I want you to come up with your own title, right? And the title, it should not be the name of, the name of the story that you're writing about, right? It should be your own original title. It should not be just essay 1, right? It should be a title that sort of hints at what your arguments are going to be about, right? So obviously here, the mother's mixed messages in Girl, right? And so we get a sense that there's going to be a different interpretation of what the mother is doing, right, in the short story. All right, so yeah, so come up with something interesting, right, for the title. All right, so in Jamaica Kincaid's story Girl, the speaker is evidently a mother trying to teach her daughter how to behave. The story is basically a single paragraph speech in which the mother gives various commands, instructions, and lessons, apparently in an effort at training her child to become what their culture considers a proper young woman. Only twice does the daughter herself interrupt the mother's monologue. It's interesting that the second break occurs near the end of the story, right after the mother orders her to, quote, always squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh, the daughter asks. But what if the baker won't let me feel the bread, end quote. There is only one more sentence before the story concludes. The mother responds by asking, quote, you mean to say that after all you are really going to be the kind of woman who the baker won't let near the bread, end quote. Faced with this final exchange, many readers may wonder why author Kincaid chooses to make it the story's conclusion. It could have appeared earlier in the text, and Kincaid might have ended with any of the mother's statements that now come before it. This ending also feels inconclusive, for the very last words are a question that does not receive an answer. What, therefore, is Kincaid trying to emphasize with this puzzling finish? A closer look at its language, as well as at other words of the text, suggests that Kincaid is deliberately making us uncertain about whether the mother's stern training will indeed help her daughter become strong enough to survive in their society. The mother may believe that she is providing sufficient survival skills, but Kincaid encourages readers to suspect that she is actually disempowering her daughter, not letting her develop the willpower she needs to endure. All right, so I think this is a very effective introduction, right? So first off, right, first sentence, in Jamaica Kincaid's story, Girl, right? So I want you to include the full name of the author and the full title of the story that you are writing about. not necessarily on the first sentence, but somewhere in the first paragraph in the introduction, so that your reader knows immediately what you're talking about. Then notice too how this student, how she starts the introduction, right? She starts by a very short summary, right? So the story is basically a single paragraph speech, blah blah blah, right? So she starts a kind of a summary or a description of what the story is like, right? How it's sort of formatted, right? And so yeah, so that's one way, right, of introducing your argument, is by giving us a sense of, you know, what the story is about. A very short, you know, this is just one sentence, kind of summarizes the style of the story, right? And then later on in the middle, it's interesting that the second break occurs near the end of the story, right after the mother orders her to, quote, always squeeze. So the author here also uses quotations, right? You are not required to use quotations in the first paragraph, right? You should be using quotations in the body paragraphs, right? But it's also, but you can, if you want to, right, use quotations in the first paragraph, just to kind of, you know, give us an example of a scene, or yeah, to kind of to set up, right, your argument. Right, and then later on, in terms of the issue, right, the issue that I'm identifying here is that, oh, notice here too, what therefore is Kincaid trying to emphasize with this puzzling finish? So the author here is concerned about the ending of the short story, right? Specifically the last sentence that reads, what is it? You mean to say that after all, you are really going to be the kind of woman who the baker won't let near the bread, right? So that's the last sentence of the story, and the author is interested in thinking about what that ending means, right? Why did Kincaid end the story with this sentence, right? What does it do in terms of how the story sort of unfolded, or in terms of the lesson, right? In terms of what the story means, I guess, right? So yeah, so that is sort of like the issue, right? That she is concerned with, right? That is the question that she's going to try to answer, right? So that will be, you know, like the issue here. You get an example. She's the issue is supposed to be the question, right? And here she's literally asking the question, right? So you can do that too. I mean, you don't have to, like, it can be just kind of a, you know, you can just state your issue, right? That you will be, you know, for example, if this is what you're doing, right? You can just state that your issue is what the sort of ending means, right? And how that complicates the story, right? You can just state your issue like that, or you can ask the question, right? What does the ending mean, right? So that's one way of going about the issue, right? And then after posing that question, right, that issue, she then goes on to write the thesis, right, or to introduce the thesis, right? And so a closer look at its language, as well as at the words, as well as at other words of the text, suggests that Kincaid is deliberately making us uncertain about whether the mother's stern training will indeed help her daughter become strong enough to survive in their society. The mother may believe that she is providing sufficient survival skills, but Kincaid encourages readers to suspect that she is actually disempowering her daughter, not letting her develop the willpower she needs to endure. Right. So I think the thesis here is this last two sentences. Right. It's a very long thesis, which is fine. Theses are usually long. It could be just like one long sentence, or it could be two sentences, right? Because the thesis is supposed to be complex, right? It's supposed to sort of give a complex solution, not just that, oh, this is what I think the ending means, right? But you're supposed to state it in a clear way, right? So here, what the author is doing is, or what the author is saying in the thesis, right, is that she is going to talk about the language, right, of the text, in making sense of that ending, right? She's going to talk about language and how language operates in the story, right? And then she's going to talk about how the mother is portrayed, right? So the mother gets the last word in the story, right? But what kind of, in the beginning of the story, we get the sense that the mother is just sort of warning her daughter, right? Telling her that the society is like this, so you should behave like this, right? That to become a good girl is doing A, B, and C, right? And so we get the sense that maybe the mother is just concerned, right? And we get some sympathy, right, in the mother, right? That she is just preparing her daughter, right, to sort of to I guess to function, right, as well as she can in society, right? But the author here in this essay is arguing that in fact the mother is quite toxic, right? That instead of um, instead of reading her as someone who empowers her daughter, right? That in fact she diminishes the power of the daughter by just teaching her how to assimilate, how to how to not to be active, right? Just to be sort of, I guess she's just teaching her how to be subservient, how to be submissive in society, right? Instead of being active, right? So that's her interpretation here. That she wants to prove that the language, actually, the language of the story, right? Instead of giving the mother a sense of or instead of giving the story a sense that the mother is sort of empowering her daughter, right? The language of the story in fact disempowers, right, the daughter, the girl, right? Right. So that's kind of that's quite a complex, right, thesis, right? And so your thesis should be like that. You're talking about, like what is it about the story that the structure of the story, right? That sort of that gets your attention. And then how are you using that structure of the story to sort of prove your point, right? That the character is this or is not this, right? Or the setting or whatever your issue is, right? All right, so second paragraph, right? When the mother commands her daughter to squeeze the bread, probably she sees herself as pushing her to take charge of her life rather than meekly accept other people's treatment of her. To squeeze something is to perform a vigorous, self-assertive action, and in this case, it would involve testing the baker's product instead of just accepting it. Earlier in the text, the mother offers a few other hints that she wishes the daughter to be aggressive, not passive. For example, she advises her on, quote, how to make a good medicine to throw away a child before it even becomes a child, end quote. On, quote, how to bully a man, and on, quote, how to spit up in the air if you feel like it, right, end quote. A number of readers may infer, too, that even when she is telling the daughter how to perform household chores like washing, ironing, setting meals, and sweeping, she's fostering her independence by enabling her to handle basic demands of daily existence, right? So what she's doing here, right, is giving us the counter argument, right? So a typical structure, right, of the essay is usually, so you have your introduction, 3 paragraphs, and then conclusion. In the 3 body paragraphs, right, it's usually the first 2 paragraphs are the sort of the evidence, right, in your argumentation, right? And then the third body paragraph is supposed to be a recognition of the counter argument, right? You're supposed to talk about, oh, what do other people say? What might other people say that might contradict your argument, right? And then you're going to give a counter argument to that counter argument, right? And that makes an essay all the more effective because you're recognizing other people's possible arguments about your argument, right? So you should also, right, have a counter argument, right, or acknowledge, right, a counter argument, right. So this is precisely what a counter argument is, right? So she's and yeah, so you can include the counter argument on the 3rd paragraph, or in this case, she starts with a counter argument. This is fine too. You can do that too. Right. So she opens the body paragraphs with the counter argument, right? So she acknowledges that on surface it might seem like, because her argument, obviously, right, is that the mother is in fact disempowering the daughter, right? But she's saying here that, I can understand why some people might say that the mother is actually empowering the daughter, right? And these are the examples of why some people might say this, right? Because, she says things that, she says things that seem, right, like it's empowering the daughter. Right, so she's setting up the counter argument, right, which she's then going to rebut, right, in the succeeding paragraphs, right. And obviously, notice how she's using quotations here, right. So she's setting up the argument, and then, for example, right? So she's giving us our the counter argument, and then she gives us example of what that counter argument is, right? She advises her on, quote, how to make so copy the way that she uses quotations here. Like I said, I need quotations in the body paragraphs, right? And if you're not familiar with how to, different ways of incorporating quotations in your paragraphs, just copy this, right? Copy this structure, right? You can just say, yeah, for example, she said, quote, blah, 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 right? And then make sure you're also using in-text quotation, right? So you don't need a works-cited page, but I still want to see the page numbers, right? Use the page numbers. All right, so yeah, so she's set that up. That's the counter argument, and then now she's going to, give her counter argument to the counter, or her argument against the counter argument, right? So paragraph 3, but in crucial ways, the mother presses her daughter to play a subservient role in society, right? More specifically, she attempts to imprison her in a model of femininity that allows for men to dominate, right? Emphasizing that, quote, you are not a boy, end quote. She demands that she, quote, try to walk like a lady, end quote, and take care of her father's clothes. The various chores that she expects her daughter to perform would make life easier for the male head of the household. Moreover, they seem duties that a boy would not be required to fulfill. Right. Similarly, the mother hopes to restrict the daughter's sexual behavior. Repeatedly, she warns her, quote, to prevent yourself from looking like the slut I know you are bent on becoming, end quote. Again, it is doubtful that a boy would receive warnings like this. Like the United States, perhaps the culture reflected in this story even lacks a masculine equivalent of the derogatory term slut, right? And so, yeah, so this is her argument now, right? She's saying that, in fact, the mother disempowers her because she's teaching her um, roles, right, that sort of perpetuate a sort of patriarchal society, right? She's teaching her roles on how to become, subservient, right, to the male figure in the home, right? Um, so that's her opening, sort of, and some of you might disagree to this, and some of you might say that, yeah, maybe she's just teaching her how to, how to how to survive, and how to, I guess, how to make do, right, in a society, and that's a valid argument too, right? But in this case, right, she is arguing against the mother, and she's using that example, right? Again, notice how she's using quotations here. The number of quotations, right, that she's using one, two, three sort of long phrases, right, of quotes. And that's usually, the typical number of quotes in a paragraph that I want to see, right? 3 phrases, right? If they're longer, or if the quotes are shorter, then you might want to use more, right? All right, next paragraph at the end. I admit the mother seems to associate her daughter with an image of power, right? She implies that the girl should become, quote, that kind of woman, end quote, whom the baker does, quote, let near the bread, end quote, so that she can test it by squeezing it, right? But even here, actually, the mother does not envision her daughter as actively taking charge, right? In the scenario, the sketches in the sh- in the scenario she sketches, the baker allows the girl to feel the bread. In order to touch it, she must get his permission, rather than straightforwardly exert her own authority. Right. Right. So this is a more sort of nuanced reading. Right. So this is about that part where, she's telling, um, the girl, right, that she should be, right, the kind of woman, who the baker, um, lets uh, or who the baker allows to touch the bread, right? Um, and so on the surface, right, that seems like she's empowering the daughter, because she wants the daughter to be the kind of person who is allowed, right, to touch the bread, right? But then she's saying here that that word allowed, right, is actually key to the mother's problem, right? Because even if the daughter is the kind of um, is the kind of girl that can touch the bread, right? She still needs the permission of the baker to touch the bread, right? Does that make sense? I think that's a very nuanced, close reading, right? By using the word allowed, right? That 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 sort of like that changes the tone, right, of the statement. That in fact, um, the mother sort of um, uh, the mother sort of perpetuates the patriarchal society because she's still teaching the girl how to ask permission, right? How to be allowed, right, to touch the bread instead of sort of, you know, um, doing something, right, at her own free will, right? So I think that's a very good sort of deep reading and close reading, right? Understanding the kind of nuances, right? Moreover, she first has to be a certain sort of woman. Otherwise, she has not earned the right to examine his product, right? What type of woman is this? While some readers may argue that the mother wants her daughter to be an assertive female, many of the directions she has already given her would greatly limit her sphere of action, right? Leaving her to be a relatively unadventurous housekeeping lady, right? Evidently, the mother feels that the baker will give her daughter access to the bread only if she's basically tame and polite version of womanhood, right? So she's arguing here that yes, the mother is trying to teach the girl how to become a lady, right? But in fact, she's teaching her how to become a certain kind of lady, a lady that you know, a lady that is good at housekeeping, a lady that is good at following the man's order, right? A lady that sort of that needs to ask permission before doing what she wants, right? And so, in fact, that makes the mother, right, a subject for critique, right? And in the last paragraph, the mother may not realize that she is conveying mixed messages to her child. If we, as readers, take her to be hoping that her daughter becomes empowered and subservient, we may be spotting a contradiction that the mother herself is not conscious of. But the daughter may be aware of it. Perhaps the daughter is, in fact, not a grown up woman who is trying to make sense of paradoxical pieces of advice her mother gave her during her adolescence. The mother may have offered these supposed bits of wisdom at various different times, but the daughter is now remembering them all as one speech and struggling to figure out their implications. Kincaid's decision to conclude the story with a question mark may be her way of indicating that even in adulthood, the daughter still has not determined whether her mother wanted someone who is still whether her mother wanted to liberate her or confine her. Right. We can regard the daughter as someone who is still attempting to read her mother's intentions. As actual readers of this story, we would then be in the same position as she is, having to come up with our own interpretation of what her mother wanted her to do and be. Right. Um, so yeah. So the author of this essay, right, is critical of the mother, right, but she's also sympathetic of the mother, right, which I kind of uh, appreciate, right, because perhaps, right, the mother is also just doing, right, or saying the things even though they might have been toxic, right, even though she might have, unintentionally sort of um, modeled a subservient daughter, right? or perhaps she might have perpetuated patriarchy in society. Um, she also might this might be this is might be the only way that she knows how to sort of mother her daughter, right? And so the author here sort of acknowledges that, right? um, but then again, right, in terms of her argument, she's saying that the daughter really don't understand, will not know, and we the readers and the daughter will never know what the intentions are of the mother, right? But what the daughter might see or might interpret it is to become subservient, right, and to become sort of submissive, right? And so we the readers can also interpret it as that, right, as perpetuating, right, sort of this patriarchal society, right? And so yeah, and so as you notice here, right, the the solution, the solution or the answer that the author is giving is not absolute, right? She's not saying that this is the answer, that the mother is just this problematic character, right? In fact, she is complicating that idea, right, of the mother just being one way, not the other, right? She's actually saying that the mother could actually be multiple sort of ways, or could be interpreted in multiple ways, right? And this is her interpretation, right? So yeah, so that's all I ask, right, from your essays is to have a position, right, and defend that position, right, but then be okay with not giving us sort of absolute answers, right? So yeah, so I hope that was helpful. And reread this a couple of times so that you'll have a better familiarity, I guess, of the flow. Um, and yeah, copy the structure. This is like a good example of a 5 paragraph essay. Where the thesis is, what the conclusion is like, how to quote, how to use quotations, right? So I think that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.